Welcome back. All right, so our crates in our barrel here, they have some personality with our variations that we put in. But now we have the next step that we need to tackle. And this is a very important step, and it's one of probably the biggest secrets that is held across this whole artistic industry here. And that is the idea of gradients. Now, what do we mean when we say gradients? Now, gradients are all about the positioning on the mesh. So let's pop over here, and I'm going to show you a few of the things that I've done here. And I want you to notice something. So we can see how down here, it's a little bit darker. And up here, it's a little bit lighter. And you can see that gradient on all of these angles as well. Now, if we pop over to a different hero prop that I've worked on here, you can see how it's darker down here and lighter up here. Pop over to this one, same thing. We've got this gradient going on. So it's almost like there's a bit of a shadow down here and a bit of light up here. But also, it's about how things like dirt and grime collect versus how dust collects. But it's not just a simple matter of dark and light. There's an actual gradient that happens here. If we were to take a look at this door, for example, an actual photograph and not a piece of CGI. This door here, we can see the gradient from dark to light. Down here at the bottom, it's darker and grungier. It's where more dirt and grime collects. And it starts to gradually fade out into less grunge. Up here, lighter grunge towards the top, where a different kind of grime tends to collect. So think of more dirt down here at the bottom and more light-colored dust at the top. And just like the bottom, this gradually starts to fade out into less grunge, until right in the middle, the two grunges tend to fade into each other. Now, sometimes they'll actually fade out before they meet. Other times they will actually meet and blend. But regardless, the idea here is that the overall value ends up being this gradient from dark at the bottom, light at the top. So then the question is, how do we control that in Substance Painter? Well, let's pop over here, and I'm going to change my drop down from material down here into mesh maps to position. This position map is one of the things that gets baked when we bake it. And this position map is telling Substance here where the bottom versus the top is, as well as where the left versus the right is. Now, if we're doing a gradient from bottom to top, dark at the bottom, light at the top, then what we use is this position map to be able to control that. So what we're going to do here is we are going to go into our wood folder. So we're going to actually do this by material here. So we're going to go into our wood folder, and we've got our different wood based on our material ID in here. But our gradient, we're going to go ahead and affect both of those, because it is going to collect on all of the staves here, regardless of which one is next to each other. Because if you remember, these particular material ID colors, this separation here, was all about getting a different wood grain. So what we'll do is we will, on top of our variations here, we're going to create a new fill layer. And for this, we really only want to affect the color layer. So I'm going to hold down Alt and click on Color to isolate this one, deselect all the others. Now, to make this easy to see what we're doing, I like to change it to like a bright red because it really stands out versus the actual textures that are already on it. All right, so right off the bat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this bottom gradient just like that. Okay, now we need to add a mask to it. So I'm going to right click and add a black mask. Then I want to right click on my black mask here. I'm going to add a generator. Now, what we're going to do for this is we are going to use the position generator. So I'm going to click on this button here. And we're going to come down here and we're going to find this generator called position. This is going to take advantage of our position map that has been baked. So if we click on this, you'll see that we start to get a little bit of a gradient through here, but it might be kind of hard to tell. If I slide this balance around, you'll see how it changes, but it can still be pretty hard to tell. This global contrast down here controls the contrast between the light and the dark areas. So you can see as I bring it up, it tightens up that line a lot. So a good thing to do here is you can, right off the bat, slide this all the way up to 1, and it's going to give you this really hard line here to show you where that divide is. So we can see it here, we can see it here, and it doesn't even actually touch on this one over here. But we want a bottom gradient. So that's actually really easy to do. We just come over here and we find this global invert. It's currently set to false. If you click that to true, it'll actually flip it upside down. So now here's what we like to do. We'll start taking the global balance down, or rather we'll take it up to bring this down. Keep in mind that right here at 0.5, normally you take the global balance down to decrease it, but when you flip it, you got to take it up, because this global balance is just essentially changing the position of this line right here. So we'll take this value up to bring it down, we'll say somewhere around like right here. Now, once you get it in a position that, you kind of like, fits down towards the bottom, we'll go ahead and start taking the global contrast down, and you can see how it starts to blend up like that. Now, once you do this, you might find yourself bringing this balance up again, just a little bit, just to get your position in the right place. Now, this does move in a 0.01 fashion, so 0.56, 0.57, 0.58, 0.59. But if you need to get a little bit more precise, say you want something between 0.7 and 0.8, you can actually come in here and type in 0.575 and get that more precise value there. All right, so we have this. We've got the positioning the way that we like it. Now what we need to do is we need to set the grunge for this. So I'm going to click back over onto the layer thumbnail. And we're going to go ahead and change this base color. I'm going to type in grunge again to make sure that I'm filtering into grunges. And I want to find one that has a lot of dark in it, and something that makes sense. So looking through a lot of these, let's try Grunge Map 13. What does this do here? All right, that looks kind of paintish. maybe not what we're after. Let's try this grunge concrete old. No, there's a lot of white in there. Let's try grunge dirt dried. Okay, this could be useful, especially if we were to crank the scale up to 2. But keep in mind, once again, we are probably going to end up with a seam over here on the back and in a couple other places. So let's go ahead and change this to triplanar projection. All right, so we've got the grunge here with some darkness. Let's go ahead and change the blend mode of this to multiply. And that's going to make it to where it only shows the dark areas and not the light areas. So looking at this here might be like, okay, well, not much changed, right? Do you notice it? Can you look at this and can you see the difference? Maybe over here, maybe not as much over here, maybe not as much over here. But if we were to turn this layer off and then turn it back on, you'll see the contribution that it actually makes. So there's that right there. Now we need to add the top gradient layer. So let's go ahead and add another fill layer here. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to Alt-click color and change this to a bright red, just like that. I'm going to name this top gradient. Right-click and add a black mask. Right-click that mask to add a generator. Click on the generator button and select position. This time, we don't need to invert it because we do want one at the top. So we can start sliding this up, changing our balance. There we go, like that. Now, this doesn't reach over here on this one, but that's okay. We're not going to worry too much about that right now. We're just going to focus on these for the time being. So what we need to do here for the top gradient, let's go ahead and go back to the layer. And this time we want to choose a grunge that has enough white in it, enough lighter areas. Let's try this grunge dirt heavy right here. Okay, let's go ahead and change it over to triplanar. And maybe we'll up this scale to 2, see what that does. Now, from here, what we can do is we can change this blend mode to screen. And if we do that, it's just going to show the light areas here, which this is pretty strong. So if we were to take the opacity of this layer down and bring it up just ever so slightly, there we go. We get something like that. But it's still pretty strong. So at this point, you can start trying some different blend modes. Like this, really strong and obnoxious, don't really like it, even at this 18% opacity. So let's go ahead and come down here and try overlay. Now, overlay is going to give us both the light and the dark. So it might darken some areas, but the brighter contributions that it makes sometimes end up being worth it. We can also try soft light is a good one. That brings out more of the brighter portions of it. You can see the types of contributions that that makes. We can also come in here and take advantage of color dodge. Now, color dodge is going to pretty much just lighten up what's beneath it. So if you take this down quite a bit, in this particular case on the wood, that might be what I'm after. All right, There we go, like that. Now, if I were to take both of these, and I'm going to group them together, and remember, we need to set the group's blend mode to pass through so that it contributes rather than overwrites. I'm going to name this gradients, and we're going to look at the contribution that the gradients make. So this is without gradients. This is with gradients. Now, if we take off the variations, you can see that the gradients still make a huge contribution even without the variations. Just like the variations make a huge contribution without the gradients. So when you add them together, you get a much nicer effect. So let's look at that again. This was where we started with just our base materials, and then when we add the texture machine to it, we start to get this. So super cool. Let's go ahead and start applying the techniques that we've already learned to the hoops as well. Because right now, all we have is the base material on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take both of these groups. I'm going to Control C. I'm going to go into this hoops folder here, Control V to paste them. And now, look at that. We have gradients and we have some variations. Let's look at these guys individually. Take off the variations and you can see the contribution the gradients make. Take off the gradients and you can see the contribution that the variations make. Now, this may or may not be what we're after here, but it can be a starting point because we've already created the layers and we could come in and just adjust them. So let's start with the variations. I'm going to take my color off. I'm going to take my value off. We're just going to look at roughness here. And we'll see that the roughness variation that we have by default on this material is kind of good. Let's turn this on, see what it does. Keep in mind this replicates the exact one on the wood, and you don't necessarily always want that. So let's go ahead and move this over. We'll move it around, something like that, so that it's not a direct tiling between the wood and the metal. I'm going to go into the roughness drop down here so I can actually take this down a little bit, and I just want a very small contribution from that because what we had on the base was already good enough. All right, check in the material mode, right click, shift right click to move our light around. I like how that is working. Okay, see the value variation. That's pretty cool, but it does tile directly from the wood. So maybe we come in here and we try a different grunge. That might be a little too strong. Let's try Grunge Map 01. And I think I like that. So let's try the color variation. Now, something with the metal here, probably not going to want the same colors going on. In this particular case, I might change this yellow to a little bit more of an orange color. And I'm going to raise the saturation and value on this blue a little bit. And then maybe consider bringing this up just a little. Okay, I really like that. Okay, so that's our variations. Now let's go in and add our gradients in. And one thing with this is that this is a little too harsh. Way too much. Subtlety is definitely our friend when we're working with the texture machine. So let's come in here. I'm going to turn off my top gradient. I'm going to look at this here and let's just start lowering the opacity some. maybe even consider using a different grunge. This grunge concrete might be a good one. Of course, don't forget, we can always just delete this and change this to red and check on where our gradient's actually at. And I think the hoops here could probably use a larger gradient. So let's go ahead and go back into the mask, back into our position generator here. And I'm going to take this global balance down a little. And I'm going to take the contrast down a little until I get something that is pretty dark on these two, but then also, you know, is really affecting this one, but it's a lot more blended. Okay, that works for me. Let's go in and let's choose a gradient for this. Let's try grunge concrete burnt. Okay, I kind of like that. Yeah, I like the contribution that that makes. Okay, so then we go into the top gradient. Let's look at the top gradient here. We'll turn it on. And I think it's good, the position that it's at, but I want a different grunge. So let's go in and let's try a grunge map 09. And that ends up being pretty strong. So let's take the opacity down some. Working it right around 5, something like that. There we go. Now we have the texture machine applied to both the wood and the hoops here. So variations, gradients. Now, we do have an elephant in the room, which is this top cap right here. And, you know, we're not really going to get any good gradients on this one because it's horizontal. So here we really want to focus on the variations. So let me go ahead and actually start over with this. So I'm going to add a layer and I'm going to roughness variation. I just want roughness. Let's run through this. We're going to grab something that's highly contrasted, grunge map 07. Let's look here. Too big, so let's increase the scale. There we go. And let's set this to overlay. Not quite doing what I'm wanting because, can you guess? I forgot to change my base color drop down here to roughness. So you always got to pay attention to which channel you're working on up here. So let's change it to overlay now. And there we go. We're getting a better effect. Let's slide it. Let's guess around 35 there. Go into material, see what that does. All right, cool. We've got some roughness effect going on. Okay, so I'm going to do another one here. This is going to be value variation. I want just color this time. I'm going to come in and let's find grunge map 07. No, it's we just used 08. I like that. So let's change this to overlay. But once again, don't forget to change your channel you're working in. So we'll change this to overlay in the base color channel. Has a huge effect on there, but we will just take this down in the opacity, somewhere around 33 there. You can see the contribution that that makes. And then now we'll add another fill layer. We're going to call this color variation. I want just the color. We're going to choose a grunge that is probably, that might be a little too dark. Let's try Grunge Map 01 on this. Gonna offset it like that. There we go. I kind of like that. And we will right click, add the filter. I want a gradient filter. And then let's do the black. Do it more of a kind of yellow, not yellow, but more of a kind of this almost beige color. Almost give the idea of some sun bleaching going on. And then the white, let's go ahead and make that kind of a dark brownish there. And then this gray, gonna add a hint of a desaturated blue. All right, then we'll try leaving it on normal, and I'll take it down to 3, 4, bring it up a little. The blue ends up being a little strong. Let's try some different blend modes. What happens if we set it to overlay? See the contribution it makes. Maybe we'll try soft light and bring this up some, around 41. There we go. That gives us something interesting to work with. So the blend modes that you actually use for these things are on a case-by-case basis. They're not necessarily always just strict and straightforward. So experiment with them, experiment with the blend modes, experiment with the opacities until you get something that you really like. So this here is what we get when we add the texture machine with our variations and our gradients. And now these guys are looking pretty cool.